Hi there, welcome. This is Paranormal Blip. This is episode 55, Grusch, Unpacked. This follows yesterday's extraordinary interview with Ross Coulthard and David Grusch. And, it was absolutely brilliant. I'm going to put a link in with a video embedded. The video has been taken off of YouTube by News Nation. And if you're in the States, you can go to the News Nation website and watch it embedded in their actual website. But for the rest of us, we've got to kind of scrabble around. Now, interestingly enough, there are numerous summaries online, but I'm using the one that I'll link to, which is from Baptiste Friscourt. I think that's how you pronounce his name, maybe. And so this is a summary, and I'll go off of this. Obviously, you know the score, don't you? Well, before I get going on that, thanks ever so much for supporting Paranormal Blip and for listening. It's great to know that you are out there, and it's great to know that more people are finding and listening, finding us. And if you want to subscribe, then please do. It's only costs a handful of tank plastics per week, only 99 pence per month, which is extraordinary value, isn't it? Yes. And also, the other thing about that is that the best way of contacting me is on Twitter. I'm just trying to do this all in one go. Can you tell? Yeah. So Twitter, at Paranormal Blip on Twitter. I do post things up on Instagram. I post the shows up on Instagram, but I don't really hang around Instagram that much. So Paranormal Blip on Twitter is the best way of contacting me. So let's get down to it then. And of course, this is another bit of a kind of special episode, this one, in response to the fantastic show that we saw last night. And I have to say, News Nation really pulled out all the stops. It was a beautiful production. Ross Coulthard was his usual extraordinary, brilliant self, like very focused and absolutely on point throughout. Incredible questions. Grush came across as very amiable, incredibly authentic. And we know from all of the checking that, the debrief did, all of the checking that Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal did, all of the checking that Ross did, and other people in the UFO community in the last week have said, well, yeah, also we kind of know about him as well. And we can kind of verify everything that everyone said. And before we get into it, actually, while it's on my mind, I really like the way that Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal this last week have made themselves available to be interviewed. I've seen a lot of the interviews in the last week with both of them, and they really know their stuff. They're kind of career journalists, and they know how journalism works. They know how to chase down a story, and all of their experience and their dedication to the craft and the kind of work of journalism is really clear in this story. And it's extraordinary that some people are trying to kind of poke holes in Grush's account. Because let's just get to before we get to the meat of the interview, let's just outline some of the things that we know about the situation before he went public. Okay. He was essentially found out that there was illegal activity going on. So he reported that illegal activity to the Inspector General for the intelligence community. And he did an 11-hour interview with the Inspector General. Now, it's on oath. You can't break the law by telling lies to this Inspector General, okay? If you do that, then you go to prison, right? So, this happened a long time ago. This happened a few years ago when he did this interview, okay? He then went to various senators and Congress people in various, committees, the relevant committees, and said, like, okay, well, my level of clearance is ahead of your level of clearance. Top trump the clearance. I win in top trumps every time. Thank you very much. But I will tell you what I know that you can know, in terms of where your clearance is. So he's done this absolutely by the book. And then he used the whistleblower legislation that was signed into law by Biden in December 22, which was, 6 months ago, yeah? Almost 6 months to the day, about 6 months and 2 weeks ago, roughly, because it's the 12th of June now, isn't it? Yeah. In 2023, yeah? Oh, I saw Spider-Man, by the way. Oh, my God, it's absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And Daniel Kaluuya is my new hero. He's the guy that does the voice for Punk Spider-Man, whatever his name is, Spider-Punk. Yeah, he's brilliant. I really love that actor. He's absolutely brilliant. Anyway, that's off the point. We're not talking about Spider-Man. We are talking about Grusch. And so Grusch, did his, again, under oath, gave this information to the Senate. So the Senate has got this information. And now it's a question of, the ball is in the Senate's court, okay? And what are they going to do about it? Well, it looks like they're gearing up for public hearings. And the obvious thing to do, from like anybody's point of view, would be to get Grush to attend those public hearings. And he said that he's up for doing that. I believe he said that. And we'll kind of go from there. Now, there's always rumors that other whistleblowers will come out. So we'll see, and I'll talk about a very interesting article that came out a couple of days ago, which corroborates quite a lot of what Grush has said. So now, so I'm saying that because there are people that will remain nameless who try to pick holes and debunk, and it's science and journalism and anything like politics. You have to look at everything with a kind of laser light focus and see that you're being told the truth, right? I live in a country where for the last 3 years we had Boris Johnson, or longer than about 3 years, Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. Do you know what I mean? We know something about liars, okay? So nobody's interested in the UFO community. Nobody's interested in spending any time with anyone that is, giving us disinformation. And Grush said something very interesting about that as well. The disinformation has been, by and large, generally speaking, the years and years and years and years of cover up, and the stigma exists in order for people that have had experiences to feel, I can't be taken seriously, so I'm not going to come forward, and that is damaging and traumatic and, an absolute disgrace. And it means that we have no idea in terms of the actual size of what is going on. Yeah. So that's the disinformation. We've been at the kind of sharp end of the disinformation for 90 years. Right, so let's get into this. Now, this is Baptiste Friscourt's work here. So thank you, Baptiste, who I do follow, by the way, on Twitter. And I'll put his link in the episode description as well, so you can follow him as well. Right, here we go. TLDR, which apparently I had to look it up because I don't know, I'm an old man. I don't know these newfangled things. Punk Spider-Man would know this, but I don't know this. TLDR is too long, didn't read. So it's a summary, yeah? It's too long. I can't be bothered to watch 45 minutes. Just give us the 2-minute, TikTok version. TLDR interview Ross Coulthard. He insists on not talking about extraterrestrial origin and describes the origin as non-human intelligence. However, given the unanimity of the contacts he's spoken to, he is certain of this. So this is a really interesting thing. And some of the sloppier reporting and some of the kind of banter, even on News Nation, who did an excellent job yesterday, And, they also then followed it with a 2 hour, they followed the 1 hour interview with a 1 hour analysis show, which was slightly marked by having old, bloody idiots turn up. Have like Ross Coulthard rolling his eyes like the rest of the world when this, Joker kind of appears for 5 minutes. And I have to say, like, seriously, if you're following this as a news organization, you do the investigating. Yep. Don't just invite some guy that used to play computer games or make computer games to come on just because he's kind of like there. That's his whole game, right? Forget about him. UFO Twitter need to drop that dude like a bloody stone, like yesterday. Yeah. So forget about that guy. We've got to sharpen up our game here as a, you know, group of people that are interested in this. But also, if you're following this, and if you're a journalist, and if you're interested in, interrogating this, Ross Coulthard, he is an excellent investigative journalist, and he created the links. Okay, he created his connections. He created the environment whereby people knew that he could be trusted. All right, so you know all of the news organizations on the planet should be doing that, not relying on a bunch of jokers, okay, to kind of give the other opinion. Forget about all that. It's far too serious for mucking about anymore. So apart from that, News Nation, you did a stand-up job. And apart from a couple of people saying, oh, aliens, but you can kind of understand that because of the old ontological shock, which is a fantastic name for a wrestler. I'd love to come into the ring, thousands of people cheering with handmade banners, and I am dressed as, what would I be dressed as? Probably a banana or something. Yeah, the ontological shock. So anyway, where am I with this? Oh yeah. So at one point, though, the non-human intelligence. At one point, he says, they could be from another physical dimension, and then he talks about space time, and he says, I don't know, but it's a possibility. And of course, we all know in the UFO world, in the kind of UAP world, we all know the possibilities of ultra terrestrials, like people that have been here for like hundreds of thousands of years, longer than that. We know of people that the idea of time travel is like there's various like different dimensions. There's various other kind of propositions out there, not just extraterrestrial. Okay, so let's get back to Baptiste's list. He saw photographs and documents. He does not have any certainty about the mode of propulsion. The UAPTF has been denied access to a large program for the recovery of physical devices which have been recovered either following a crash or intact. And what Baptiste doesn't say, but I will put in, is or landed. A crash or landed. And we'll get back to landed in a minute, because landed opens up a whole world of possibilities. All classified information was passed on to the Inspector General, who validated his complaint, called it credible and urgent. It seems that there have been cases of death due to NHIs, in addition to the threat hanging over US strategic sites. So that's nuclear sites. Talked about Maelstrom, and he says, yeah, well, it might be that they're, some might just be a kind of benign scoping what we have. But, it's obviously he's speculating as to the reasons why UAPs are observing, and in some cases, like Maelstrom, actually kind of, manipulating nuclear sites. Technologies and materials have been entrusted for expertise to certain private contractors, which gives them an unfair advantage. He confirms the partial recovery of UFO in 1933. This was Mussolini, transferred to the USA in 44-45 with the Vatican's help. The Pope at the time essentially kind of arranged this shipping of the UFO that crashed, I think it was north of Milan, in the Milan area, and Marconi worked on it apparently, and it's bell-shaped. There's quite a lot of information about that out there, and for years it's been kind of known. But this guy, he says, like Grusch, he says, "Oh well, actually, I've been told that I can talk about that one," which is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, the whole thing is amazing. But for him to confirm that a UAP came down and crashed in Italy in 1933, and then kind of talks about the what happened to it. And apparently, I think it was, I can't quite remember who it was, but somebody that I've been listening to the last couple of days says it might be that he can talk about that because it happened in Italy. I'm not sure that I kind of get that, the thinking behind that, but maybe that makes sense. Not authorised to talk about Roswell, but declares that, as an analyst, the final report published on the subject shows that there were errors and even disinformation injected into it. Yeah, he got quite animated when he was talking about that Roswell, kind of thing. The report that came out in I think it was the mid-90s, was called Case Closed. He states that crashes are proof that this is a technology, as no technology is perfect and mistakes happen. So that was in response to the obvious question that loads of people ask, and Ross kind of put it to Grusch. He said, well, if they're so advanced, then how come they're crashing? And he said, well, we're advanced, but we crash our cars, we crash our motorbikes, blah, blah, blah. We crash our hovercraft. So why can't they crash? I mean, of course they're going to crash, Come on. He didn't quite say it like that, but essentially that's what he got to. He confirms the disinformation campaign on the subject. The campaign's goal is to keep reverse engineering secret to gain a major technological advantage. He confirms the gimbal is not a jet, but it could be an atmospheric phenomenon. He confirms the Tic Tac is a non-human technological object and was filmed in FLIR 1. He confirms the object filmed from the Omaha showing an object in infrared entering the ocean was really anomalous, and that's one of Knapp and Corbell's videos. That's the one that went into the ocean, the kind of circular object, the kind of spherical object. Many good quality videos could be released by going through the declassification systems in place. That would be brilliant if that happens. Many crafts reach a size of 100 meters. The Department of Defense restricts Arrow's access to information as much as possible to slow down the search. And we know about this Title 50 thing that, they don't have the tickets they need to investigate. So when, it's put to old Susan Goff, that everyone calls Go, but I remember Michael Goff, who played Alfred in Batman, 1989 Batman, with your man Michael Parkinson as Batman up against Jack, what was his name? Jack Whittaker. Yeah. Well, anyway, the actor that played Alfred, his name was Michael Goff, wasn't it? Yeah, Goff. So it's not Suzanne Go, it's Goff. Although I might be doing a King Kane here. So is it Goo Goff or Goff Go, or is it King Kane? Well, we know it's Kane, although it's spelled Keen, but she says Kane. Fair enough. So maybe Susan says Go and not Goff, but I think it actually must be Goff. Anyway, where were we at? We're there with the Go Goff. Go Goff, go Goff. Oh yeah. So Goff comes out saying, well, Arrow doesn't have any verified. They haven't verified any kind of hidden technology. That's the whole point of the complaint. That's what he's complaining. You're just confirming the thing that the guy's complaining about. He's saying, yeah, we need somebody to verify this damn thing. So I'd say, well, they haven't verified it. Yeah, that's what he's saying, pal. Goffo. Anyway, there's an ongoing competition between different. Oh, hold on. Sorry, I've missed one. So I'm so excited. There have been attempts and techniques developed to shoot down UAPs. That would be really interesting to see if any of those were successful. I can imagine some of them have been. There's an ongoing. You remember that all of that stuff about baiting. And I'll tell you what I will put in the link actually is Loose Threads, because Loose Threads is absolutely sensational. And Daniel, who goes by the name Amiga Point on Twitter, was a guest on my show, wasn't he? Yeah, episode 45 or whatever that was. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but that's a great episode to listen to. And he briefly mentioned baiting, didn't he? I think in Loose Threads. So I'll put a copy of Loose Threads out. And if you're new to this, if you're kind of like just like, oh, what's this? I'm interested in golf, and oh, what's this guy? Well, this is the thing to read. Yeah, after if you're interested in not golf, sorry, I'm a golf head. I've got golf on my brain. If you're interested in Grush and you're like looking around for content, you're like searching in Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Podcasts or Pods Stacy or whatever you're looking at, and you find me, then aren't you lucky? And also read Loose Threads, go to the episode description. If by any chance you are a regular listener and you haven't read Loose Threads yet, then not sure where you've been, but this is now the time to read it, because what's really interesting, of course, is that, and I'll come to this in a minute, but is that everything is thrown. It's like a kind of new color in the kaleidoscope, yeah? A new color, or maybe not a new color, more like a new a new revolution of the kaleidoscope. So all of the pieces are fitting in different, making up different patterns, and you can see, what I'm basically describing what a kaleidoscope does. But what I'm saying is that you can kind of see things freshly with new eyes because of this information that Grush has come forward with. Ongoing competition between different nations to develop technologies, but at the same time they fear the impact on their population. So this kind of funny thing of, we know this from George Knapp went to Russia. He's got the documents. He knows the score, and he knew that they knew. Well, he found out that they knew all about what we were doing. Because they were spying on us, weren't they? The old Ruskies. And if you're in Russia, listen to this. Then I don't think I do have any listeners in Russia. So but keep your head down, won't you, please? Um, anyway, yeah, so that's a kind of known thing. And I have no doubt whatsoever. We know that the UK was in that Five Eyes conversation a couple of weeks ago with Australia, New Zealand, Canada. I mean, like I've said, ages ago, every nation on earth has got a UFO desk of some kind or another, because it's a worldwide global phenomenon. So you are going to have people wherever you are, kind of reporting it. And so you are going to also have people in your armed services, in your, people that you trust, reporting it the same way that, every third person I meet has got a ghost story. Do you know what I mean? Like there are many, many people there who's kind of, well, actually, having said that, I did see something. And there's like loads of my friends have seen, like, before this, they were friends before this. They didn't tell me about it for years. But loads of my friends have seen stuff, not as many as have seen ghosts, but quite a lot. And I'm sure it's for you as well, So there's a UFO desk on in every kind of government on the planet. There's no question about that. And there's probably secret protocols, at least, or kind of non-public protocols, at least, in terms of the military of those countries to, like, what do you do if you kind of see a bit of this, And yeah, so obviously, we've got competing programs, and I'm sure that the allies of the US are, kind of sharing information. I'm also sure that quite a lot of the information that the UK, for instance, has is like totally top secret, and they're not telling anyone, and they're probably not going to get very far either, because, they're not getting the Oxford boys in because they can't trust, that it won't leak. And then this kind of tension of how are people going to react. Grush was saying, the financial implications, the kind of economic implications, if people have a bad reaction to the truth of this, And so then you do then think, well, is there a kind of soft disclosure in place? And of course, Leslie Kane talked about that, and she was asked that. And she said, well, I don't know, like, it's really difficult. Nobody's giving us the information, number one, but also she doesn't, which is a slightly different point, But nobody is, as far as she's concerned, has some kind of like, architecture of rolling out of disclosure. Yeah. whereby, this piece and then this piece and then this piece and then this piece. So these conversations have been going on for quite a while with different people. Like Ross Coulthard has been talking to Grusch for over a year, I think. But of course, it takes a long time to kind of get everything in place for him to, clear it with the Department of Defense, which is also like a huge thing in terms of like the IG Inspector General, sorry, for the intelligence community. That is the kind of key thing for me to know that he is, like on it. Yeah. Another key thing is the named people now retired who are named people who were supporting him, like publicly giving their real names, supporting him to the debrief. And they're realizing, well, okay, like this is the time now that we need to kind of put our heads above the parapet a little bit. Like they are retired, but they also had somebody that was actually still working for the government. And he changed his name to Jonathan Gray. And apparently he goes by that name. He didn't just change it for the debrief article or for the conversation with, Leslie or Ralph. Like he apparently he works in this organization. He's essentially a spy. So in that role that he has at that organization, he goes by this name. It's not his real name, but that's the name that he goes by, Jonathan Gray. He'd like to know if more in-depth contacts have been made between NHI and US. So this is something that I'm going to look at in a bit of detail. So it's interesting that Baptiste uses the word contacts because the word that is used in the interview is agreements. And I'm going to play for you a little bit, like absolutely fascinating. This is the bit for me. When I read this, I was kind of like teed up a little bit because I listened to Need to Know and Bryce Zabel in the episode before the, the like last week's, not the one they did yesterday today, but last week's. He said like, wow, you ask him, has anybody been killed? You ask him, blah, blah, blah. So I thought, well, obviously we know the answer to that then, you know what I mean? And people, we'll get to that, But for me, I didn't know about this, right? So just listen to this.
But if this non-human intelligence is so advanced, and at least some of them are malevolent, why haven't they destroyed us already? Perhaps some fragile yet combustible détente has been reached. Grusch has written an internal document about his discoveries that refers to agreements that risk putting our future in jeopardy. And it's quite clear that you're talking about agreements between America and non-human intelligences. Have we made agreements with non-human intelligences?
That's the kind of information I really hope national leadership is able to get to the bottom of.
I need to pin you down on this. Are there agreements between non-human intelligences and the American government?
I think that's a question that I would like to know all the details of as well.
So let's spend a moment speculating on what that means. It's absolutely extraordinary, and it's interesting when you watch that section. You can see that as best as Ross does, channeling his best Robin Day, which is a joke for people over 60 in Britain. It doesn't get very far, but because he's Grusch is sticking to his line. He's really not giving much away. But of course, if there was an internal document that he wrote talking about this, then there might be something to this. And so you have to think, well, okay, what does that mean then? Well, what I suppose that it means is that it brings us back to this landed. What does it mean if something is landed? What do I mean by that? What do I mean? What does anybody mean? What does mean? What does mean? For years and years in the UAP community, there has been various kind of rumors or stories around and like allegations, and of course nothing is kind of proven at all. Say proven or proven? I think proven is to do with bread, isn't it? Well, no, maybe that's proof. Anyway, the stories go, aliens and the US government, aliens, I use the word aliens because these stories are about, aliens, but let's say NHI and the US government struck a deal a long time ago. And the story is that essentially uh, you get our technology. This is the NHS speaking, of course. And what we do is we get your bodies. And so the alleged abductions have been essentially agreed, kind of sanctioned to take place on the basis that that is the US government's part of the deal. They'll turn a blind eye. They won't do anything about it. They certainly won't investigate it. They'll just ignore it. And in fact, what they'll do is they'll do the old NHIs the favor by making sure that for years and years and years of placing, stories in newspapers and in kind of popular culture, the idea of that is, the Mickey is taken out of them to be very kind of gentle about what happens. And Whitley Strieber talks about, this is the kind of last area whereby, crimes can be committed against people and essentially you're not taken seriously. Like you're just laughed at, even though, you can be violated, you can be abducted, various other things can happen to you. And if you go down that kind of area of the kind of the UFO world, it does get kind of extraordinarily bizarre quite quickly. Yeah. Having said that, J. Christopher King was on the show 3 times, and he is one of the founders of the Experiencer Group. And so I have no doubt that this is something that absolutely happens. Now, is it a question that the reason why people, like in our culture, it's one of the last taboos, is because it's part of the agreement. It's like a way of the US government and, kind of Western society as a whole, kind of taking the US's lead on this, kind of realizing, if you come up with a trauma, if you tell somebody about a traumatic crime, usually you've got sympathy and empathy, from like a normal person. But what about if the traumatic crime is ridiculed? Like, years before you were even born, this idea was out there that people who have this happen to them, you're going to ridicule them. Well, then you're going to ridicule them. Yep. You don't get the empathy, you don't get the sympathy, you just get the ridicule. And over years and years and years and years, it's now got to the point where, things are changing now, thankfully, thanks to, the Experiencer Group and, various other kind of conduits whereby people can find safe spaces to talk about experiences like that. Having said that, kind of in the wider world, it still is ridiculed. So maybe that's part of the deal. We get the technology, and they get whatever it is that they're doing. And there's like many, many, many stories, and many, people with, rock solid, totally rock solid careers, like Terry Lovelace as an example. The Terry Lovelace story is absolutely extraordinary. And he was like a kind of like this high up dude in his state, wasn't he, Terry? So those kind of rumors have been going around for years. That there's a kind of agreement, and also the agreement that they talk about in the interview, the actual agreement, which is connected to a kind of a nuclear non-proliferation, treaty with the US and the USSR at the time. That's just saying if UAPs come along, then we'll contact each other to make sure that each other does say, like, is it you or is it UAP? which of course is extraordinary in itself. Do you know what I mean? But that doesn't have anything to do with an agreement between the US and NHIs. Yeah. So, but this whole area is absolutely extraordinary. Now, also a story that's been doing the rounds that I spoke about it is Holloman, and Holloman is one of my most popular episodes, which is a surprise to me. But people love that Holloman, and apparently, and we'll see if it truly kind of has been debunked, as it were. But apparently, that footage was, kind of somebody. I haven't looked into this, but just on the grapevine, I hear that somebody's kind of looked into that footage, that 9 seconds, whatever it was, and apparently that was just like an aircraft that was kind of sliced into this documentary that I spoke about. But even if you take that out, on the latest episode of Need to Know, Ross Coulthard, who recorded with Bryce Sable, and Ross Coulthard recorded it immediately after arriving home from the live broadcast that came after the taped interview last night, like in the middle of the night in British time, British summertime. And Ross was talking about Holloman. It's like there's various stories. But I think the one he mentioned was 1968, I think, whereby the story is essentially a craft landed and NHIs met, generals. So who it's impossible to kind of pin down at the moment, but just the mere suggestion from somebody like Grusch that there may be an agreement in place, an agreement that could, kind of not could go south for us. I mean, this is what reminded me of Somber. Yeah, do you remember Sober? Do you remember Lou Elizondo described? Somebody said, I think it might have been Kurt on Theories of Everything. Maybe it wasn't him. I think it was though. Somebody said, like, if you could sum up in one word or whatever, a phrase, like, from your point of view, knowing what you know, how do you feel about it all? And he said, somber. And everyone thought, God, somber, chinking, chonks, they thought. But you think, hold on a minute. I mean, we actually probably don't have much of a choice with this, If they rock up and say, come on then, like, here's the deal. We'll give you a bit of the old scrap metal, but this is what you're going to do for us. I mean, it is like, if there's anything to that comes out and can be verified, that is like, obviously, it's like the greatest political scandal like of all time, like beats all of the gates. It even beats Watergate, beats Boris Johnson having parties, and it beats all of them. It beats the Sue Gray working for the Labour Party. It's even bigger than that. So anyway, so I found that absolutely extraordinary, and it's the bit in the interview that jumped out for me, And of course, though, there are others. So let's go back to Baptiste here. So he described that as contact. He thinks it's likely that witnesses have been silenced to protect the secrecy. Well, okay, so that wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, like I say, like this is the kind of kaleidoscopic, there's men in black. Like, of course, if you've got like a secret organization that is like picking up crashed and landed craft, and you've got like bodies of NHI there, then of course you're going to have people like knock on the door and say, keep it stum, pal. He's long wondered whether he wasn't being manipulated, and spent 4 years checking the testimonies of his contacts, all of whom have very high levels of accreditation and are all coherent, which convinced him. So, this he's a smart guy. Like, he's incredibly successful. He's like 38, I think he is. Like, he's a young guy, or maybe even 36. He's a young guy. He came out, he's like in the army or whatever, and then he went into intelligence and kind of working for the government. And he rose like spectacularly fast, And it's really exciting that he's kind of, I don't know exactly what his plans are, but he wants to, kind of like be in the mix here, kind of talking about this. So it's really, really brilliant. And obviously, anybody, like, you know, they're going to kind of check out, well, am I being sold a pup here or not? And of course, he has done that. And all of the documentation, I mean, we don't get to see it because we're not read in, obviously, but all of the documentation has gone to the appropriate, the governor inspector the inspector general. I always forget that. The inspector general for the intelligence community. Do you know what I mean? He's seen it all. Avril Haines has been notified of this. And I expect she's like all over it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, why wouldn't you be, Avril? Why wouldn't you be? I'm sure Avril listens. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of other people in these programs who want the information to see the light of day. Right, so that dozens reminds me of something else that we're going to be touching on in a few moments. So in the interview with Ross Coulthard, Grusch is asked how many crafts do you have, and he says something like quite a few. And then in Need to Know, by the way, if you're interested in this, you've got to be listening to Need to Know, because Need to Know is the kind of, at the moment, that's the podcast that Ross Coulthard does with Bryce Zabel every couple of weeks, it seems. And but at the moment, obviously they're kind of talking about this, and they didn't. The one I'm talking about, the latest one, was, like I say, just recorded just after the live section of yesterday's News Nation kind of 2-hour event, if you like. And in that, Bryce Zabel, who had met Grusch, said that Grusch had told him that their number is in double digits, the number of UFOs, like craft, that the United States has possession of, again, double digits. So bear that in mind when I read to you the work of Michael Schellenberger. Michael Schellenberg. So bear that in mind when I read to you the work of Michael Schellenberger on his Substack publication, which is called Public. Okay, and of course I'll link it in the episode description. So the title, Michael Schellenberger is an author. He does lots of journalism for lots of different, kind of newspapers. So he's a kind of working journalist, yeah, and he's also a writer as well. Okay, so US has 12 or more alien spacecraft, say military and intelligence contractors. Military intelligence agencies are withholding evidence from Congress, sources say. That's the Men in Black out there beeping their little horns. Beep your horn at me, Men in Black. Men in Black. Right, okay, so get a load of this. So it talks about Grusch, okay, and this is the interesting bit from my point of view. So I'll kind of lead into it a little bit. Grusch, 36, is a senior intelligence analyst who represented the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, to the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, ATIP, the precursor of ARROW, from 2019 to 2021. Grusch is also a decorated combat officer for his service in Afghanistan. Quote, his assertion, so who's this talking? Just hold on a sec. His assertion, it's Carl Nell, that's who it is. His assertion concerning the existence of a His assertion concerning the existence of a terrestrial arms race occurring sub rosa over the past 80 years, focused on reverse engineering technologies of unknown origin, is fundamentally correct, said Carl Nell, a retired Army colonel who worked with Grusch on the UAP task force, which preceded the creation of ARROW, told The Debrief. As is the indisputable realization that at least some of these technologies of unknown origin derived from non-human intelligence. Some end quote from Carl Nell. Some of the same sources who shared information about Grusch, as well as others, spoke to public about retrieved spacecraft that they say is in the possession of the US government. I know of at least 12 to 15 craft, said one person, who said they shared the information with Arrow and Congress. Every 5 years we get one or two recovered for one reason or another, from either a landing, or that we catch, or they just crash. A different contractor said there were at least 4 morphologies, different structures. 6 were in good shape, 6 were not in good shape. There were cases where the craft landed and the occupants left the craft unoccupied. There have been high-level people, including generals, who have placed their hands on the craft, and I would have no reason to disbelieve them. One source described having seen 3 kinds of craft, including one shaped like a triangle, and another that, quote, looked like a chopped-up helicopter with the front bubble of a Huey helicopter with the plastic windows, or more like a deep-sea submarine with a thick piece of glass bubble-shaped, and where the tail rudder should have been, it was a black egg-shaped pancake, and instead of landing gear, it had upside-down ram horns that went from the top to the bottom and rested on the ends of the horns. End quote. The sources said they felt compelled to speak out publicly to validate Grusch's claims, but did not want their names used. Quote, we have non-disclosure agreements or secrecy agreements that we are supposed to take to the grave, said one person. 2 of the 3 sources declined to answer certain questions, even off the record, out of concern for their safety, and continued access to information. Quote, I briefed the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Arrow, and so that information is out there, the person said. What Grusch did was the first step to get the information out. Okay, so that's a really interesting article, and it's essentially corroborating, it's backing up what Grusch has said, but it's also kind of leading us down the path a little bit longer. You've got this extraordinary description of this, out of this world description. It sounds like a kind of children's picture. The egg-shaped pancake at the back instead of the tail rudder, and the upside-down ram horns instead of the landing gear. Absolutely incredible. So that's in the episode description as well. Okay, so let's sum it up then in a TDLR way. Is that what it's called? TDLR? TLDR, in a TLDR way. Let's sum it up. Everything's changed in terms of like our understanding of like where we're at, because every time I now think about UAPs and the paranormal and the kind of anomalous phenomena, the parapsychology, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to be thinking about Grusch, okay? Because there's a good chance that quite a bit of it is true, basically. Do you know what I mean? I mean, of course, I always knew that a lot of it was true, just because you kind of know, if you look into it enough, you start talking to enough people, you get a sense of it. But it's still, I'm maybe not an ontological shock, but I still am obviously kind of processing the absolutely extraordinary nature of, we live in a world where somebody with those clearances, with that history, has said on the record the things that he said. We need to now kind of navigate ourselves around that. And for some people, it's going to be more difficult than others. I mean, I've been looking into this for a long time, and I've been speaking about it for a long time. But like anybody that's kind of deeply into this, it doesn't touch the sides, as people used to say last year about the cost of living contest in Britain. But it doesn't, what the information I give out to you via this podcast and via Twitter is nothing compared to the amount of information I'm kind of learning about all the time, So, and all of that is it's like the kaleidoscope through which I look through the world. I think there's too many throughs in that sentence. Has been twisted, and there's a kind of we're into a new era. Certainly, I am personally speaking, if you don't mind. I'm into a new era in terms of thinking. Well, actually, hit the microphone. In terms of thinking, actually, there might be something in this, like this actually may be happening right now. In fact, there's a good chance that it is happening right now. Anyway, that's been Paranormal Blip. Thanks for following me on Twitter. Episode 56 is just around the corner, and see you later.